I didn't know what to expect when I walked into that yoga studio for the first time. Outside, the city was loud and restless, but inside, the world felt muted, softened. The walls were painted in earthy tones, sunlight streaming through tall windows and spreading across the polished wooden floor like warm silk. There was a faint aroma of lavender and sandalwood in the air, the kind of scent that made you want to exhale a little deeper, as though the room itself was reminding you to breathe. And then there was her. She stood at the front of the studio with the kind of presence that didn't need to ask for attention, it simply commanded it. Mid-40s, tall and graceful, with an easy confidence in the way she carried herself. She wore simple workout clothes, nothing flashy, yet somehow everything about her was striking. Not just her appearance, but the way her voice flowed is steady, calm, warm, like she had the power to quiet the noise in your head just by speaking. I rolled out my mat clumsily near the back, trying not to look like the complete beginner I was. She noticed, of course. Her eyes swept across the room, then lingered on me for just a second longer than necessary. There was something about that look, like she could already see my discomfort, and maybe even found it endearing. When the class began, I did my best to follow her instructions, but my body felt rigid, heavy, completely foreign. She walked slowly between the mats, demonstrating poses with a fluidity that made them look effortless. Then, halfway through, I felt her presence behind me. Her hand touched my shoulder lightly. Warm, firm, steady. "Relax here," she murmured, her voice close enough that I felt the words more than heard them. She guided my shoulder down, adjusted the angle of my hips, pressed a palm gently into my back. The embarrassment of being corrected in front of others should have been overwhelming, but instead, there was something grounding in her touch, something reassuring. I tried again, this time holding the pose the way she showed me. She gave a soft smirk, the kind that carried both approval and a hint of playful teasing. "Better," she said simply, before moving on to help the next student. But that smirk lingered with me, even as I struggled through the rest of the class. By the time the session ended, my muscles ached in ways they never had before, and yet, I felt lighter somehow. As everyone began to pack up, I caught myself glancing at her again. She was laughing with another student, but every so often, her eyes flickered back toward me. Not long enough to mean anything, yet long enough to mean something. Walking out of the studio, mat tucked awkwardly under my arm, I realized I wasn't just thinking about yoga anymore. I was thinking about her, about the way her voice had steadied me, the warmth of her hand on my shoulder, and that smirk that had made me want to come back again. I had just finished rolling out my mat, already debating whether I should slip out quietly, when I heard her voice behind me. "You did well for your first class," she said. I turned, and there she was, standing with that same air of calm confidence, her hair pulled back but with a few strands loose, softening her face. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of polite smile instructors give to every student. It felt more deliberate, almost personal. "You were stiff," she added, smirking. "Your body's fighting the poses, but that's normal. If you'd like, I can stay a few minutes, give you some one-on-one guidance. It might help." Part of me wanted to decline, my pride, mostly. But the other part, the part that remembered the warmth of her hand steadying me during class, answered before I could second guess. "Yeah, I'd like that." The studio emptied, leaving just the two of us. The quiet felt heavier now, every sound sharper, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the stretch of mats under our feet, even the rhythm of our breathing. She guided me back onto the mat. "Let's try something simple," she said, moving into a forward bend with effortless grace. I tried to mirror her, but my body resisted, stiff and uncooperative. I groaned quietly, and she laughed, not unkindly. "Relax. Don't fight yourself," she murmured, stepping closer. Then her hand rested lightly on my back, her palm warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. She pressed down, gently encouraging me to fold deeper into the stretch. "Better," she whispered. Her touch was steady, not forceful, but it carried weight, a grounding presence that made me trust her guidance. My muscles burned, yet beneath the strain there was something else, a strange awareness of her closeness, of how deliberate and careful her movements were. "You're tense," she said softly, her voice near my ear now. "Not just your muscles. You're holding yourself too tightly." I laughed nervously. Maybe I'm just not made for yoga. That smirk appeared again, playful but edged with something more. "Oh, don't worry. I'll bend you into shapes you've never tried before." The words hung in the air between us. She'd said it lightly, teasingly, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Vulnerability, maybe, or hesitation, as though she wasn't sure if she'd gone too far. For a second, neither of us moved. I felt the warmth of her hands still resting against my back, her steady breath brushing the side of my face. Then she pulled back, regaining her composure, and motioned for the next pose. We continued, but something had shifted. The corrections she gave me felt different now, not just instructional, but intimate in their own quiet way. Her fingers brushing against my arm to guide its angle, the brief press of her palm against my ribs to help me breathe deeper. Each touch small, fleeting, but each leaving an echo that lingered longer than it should. By the time we finished, I was exhausted, but not just physically. My heart was racing, not from the poses, but from the subtle tension between us. She smiled as I rolled up my mat again. "You're learning," she said. "Keep coming back. You'll surprise yourself." And as I left, her words and that smirk followed me out into the night, stirring something inside me I wasn't ready to name. Over the next few weeks, the studio became less of a place for exercise and more of a space where I felt seen. She always greeted me with that same teasing smirk, but underneath it, there was something softer. She began offering to stay after class more often, and I found myself saying yes every single time. These extra sessions were less about perfecting poses and more about being in her presence. Between stretches and adjustments, we talked sometimes about trivial things, sometimes about moments that felt heavier, more fragile. One evening, after a long series of lunges and bends, I dropped onto the mat with a groan. "You're trying to kill me," I joked, wiping sweat from my forehead. She laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "If you think this is hard, you've only scratched the surface." I leaned back on my elbows, trying to catch my breath, and looked at her. The way she moved, the way her body seemed to carry both strength and grace, it was mesmerizing. But what struck me most was when she stopped moving and simply sat across from me. That's when the facade of the untouchable instructor slipped, and she became someone else, someone real. "You know," she said quietly, "people always assume I've got it all figured out. That I'm calm, balanced, unshakable. The perfect instructor." She let out a soft sigh, her eyes focused on the floor instead of me. "But sometimes, it's exhausting being that person. It's like they forget I'm human too." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched the way her fingers played with the edge of her mat, the way her shoulders curled slightly inward as if she was bracing against her own honesty. "I don't see you as perfect," I finally said. "I mean, you're amazing at what you do, but I see you as someone real. Someone who laughs when I fall over trying to balance, who teases me, who," I hesitated, feeling my throat tighten, "who doesn't have to be perfect to be worth admiring." She looked up at me then, and for a heartbeat, her usual confidence faltered. Her eyes softened, like I'd touched something she kept carefully hidden. The moment was broken when she leaned forward suddenly to adjust me into another stretch. Her hair slipped loose from its tie, brushing against my cheek as she leaned close. The strands were warm, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, and I froze, caught between the physical closeness and the unspoken tension it carried. "Breathe," she reminded me, her voice low, her hand pressing lightly against my chest to steady my posture. I obeyed, inhaling deeply, not sure if I was following her instruction or just trying to steady my own heartbeat. The rest of the session passed in that strange balance, half instruction, half conversation, each adjustment and glance carrying more weight than it should. When I finally left that night, I realized it wasn't just yoga that kept me coming back. It was her. The woman behind the calm voice, the graceful movements, the smirk that teased and the vulnerability that slipped through when she thought no one was looking. And I wanted to see more of that. It was one of those evenings when the studio felt especially still. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside, only the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the low, steady rhythm of background music filled the room. Just the two of us, as it had been so many times before. She was guiding me through a series of standing poses, each one demanding balance I didn't quite have. I wobbled, overcorrected, and muttered under my breath, earning her soft laugh, the one that always carried just a trace of mischief. Relax, she said, stepping closer. Balance isn't about holding everything stiff. It's about letting go in the right places. I tried again, following her cues, but the stretch pulled at muscles I didn't even know existed. Then it happened, she moved in to demonstrate, her foot shifting against the mat, and for a moment she lost her grounding. Her hand shot out, catching my wrist. It wasn't a hard grip, just enough to steady herself, but in that suspended moment, the world seemed to narrow. Her fingers wrapped firmly around my skin, her body leaning just slightly into mine. My instinct kicked in, and I steadied her, my free hand brushing against her waist. Our eyes locked. Time slowed in that instant, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Her lips parted, like she might say something, but the words never came. All I could hear was the faint catch of her breath, all I could feel was the warmth of her hand gripping me tighter than she meant to. For a second, it was as though we were no longer teacher and student. Just a woman and a man, close enough that the air between us felt charged, fragile. Then she blinked, pulling back quickly, her composure snapping back into place. Sorry, she murmured, releasing my wrist. Her voice was calm again, but softer, quieter, like she was trying to convince herself she hadn't just felt what I had. I forced a smile, trying to ease the tension. Guess I'm not the only one who needs practice. She laughed, though it sounded lighter, thinner, almost forced. Still, the sound helped the air between us settle again. She straightened, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and guided me into the next pose as if nothing had happened. But it had. The rest of the session moved in silence, or at least a silence that felt louder than words. Every time her hand brushed mine, every time she stepped close to adjust me, I felt the echo of that moment, her grip, the heat of her body, the way her eyes had lingered just a second too long. When we finally ended in Savasana, lying flat on our mats, I stared up at the ceiling, my heart still restless. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt it too, that pause in time, that shift neither of us dared acknowledge. Because for me, something had changed. And I knew things between us would never quite feel the same again. After weeks of lingering in that studio long after class, I realized I'd never seen her anywhere else. She was always framed by yoga mats, incense, and soft music. I wanted to know her beyond that, outside of poses and postures, in the rhythm of everyday life. So one evening, after we rolled up our mats, I found myself blurting out, "Do you want to grab some tea? There's a place around the corner." Her brow arched, her lips curving into that familiar smirk. For a moment I thought she'd decline, retreating back into the safe role of teacher. But after a pause, she nodded. "Tea," she said simply. I could use that. The cafe was small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The warm light spilling from its windows made it feel like a refuge. Inside, the scent of fresh herbs and baked bread replaced the lavender of the studio. We slid into a quiet corner, the kind of space where words felt easier. She wrapped her hands around her cup, steam curling up into her face. Without the studio lights and instructor's poise, she looked different, still composed, but softer. "You know," I said, stirring my tea, "I've realized I don't actually know much about you." "Not really." She tilted her head, her gaze lingering on me in that way she did when she was deciding how much of herself to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "I started yoga after my marriage ended. It was survival, at first. Something to ground me when everything else was falling apart." Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. There was history there, a heaviness she usually kept tucked behind her serene exterior. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Don't be. That was years ago. Yoga gave me my life back. It gave me strength, balance, peace. And eventually, it gave me a way to help others find theirs. But sometimes," she trailed off, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Sometimes I wonder if I've spent so much time being strong for everyone else that I've forgotten how to let someone be strong for me." Her words hung between us, heavy yet fragile. I wanted to reach across the table, to place my hand over hers, but I hesitated. Instead, I met her eyes and said, "You don't always have to be the strong one. Not with me." She looked at me, then really looked at me, and something in her expression softened. Her hand brushed mine as she slid the sugar jar closer. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a warmth through me that lingered long after she pulled away. We stayed there until the cafe emptied, talking about small things, favorite books, places we wanted to travel, moments that had shaped us. By the time we stepped back into the cool night air, I knew something had shifted. The studio had been where our connection started. But here, outside its walls, it was becoming something more, something neither of us could ignore. The studio was quieter than usual that evening. Most of the lights were dimmed, the last streaks of sunset spilling through the tall windows before giving way to the soft glow of candles. We had pushed ourselves harder than normal, longer stretches, deeper holds, fewer words. By the time she led me into Savasana, the final resting pose, my body was heavy with fatigue. I lay on my mat, eyes closed, listening to the sound of my own breathing. But beneath it, I could hear hers too, slow and measured, just a few feet away. That rhythm, steady, grounding, had become something I associated with safety, with calm. Minutes passed in silence. Then, softly, her voice broke through the stillness. "Do you ever feel like you're fighting yourself?" I opened my eyes. She was lying on her back, arms stretched out, gaze fixed on the ceiling. Her tone was thoughtful, but beneath it was something fragile. "All the time," I admitted. "Why?" She turned her head toward me, her eyes catching mine in the dim light. "Because that's what this has felt like." I didn't move, but my heart skipped. "This?" She hesitated, as though measuring every word. "You. Me. Whatever this thing is between us." The air in the room thickened, as if the silence itself was listening. "I shouldn't feel it," she whispered. "You're younger, I'm your teacher, people would talk. I've told myself 100 reasons why I should stop it before it begins." And yet, her voice broke just slightly. "Every time you walk through that door, I feel it all over again." I turned onto my side to face her fully, propping myself up on one elbow. She didn't shy away from my gaze, but I could see the conflict in her eyes, the careful wall she had built straining against the truth she had just confessed. "I don't see you as just my teacher," I said quietly. "Or as someone older. I see you as the woman who steadies me when I lose balance, who makes me laugh when I'm ready to give up, who," my throat tightened, but I forced the words out, "who makes me feel alive in ways I didn't know I was missing." She closed her eyes, as if the weight of my words was almost too much. When she opened them again, there was no hiding. Her hand shifted across the mat, slow and deliberate, until her fingers brushed against mine. I hesitated only a moment before sliding my hand into hers. Our palms met, warm and tentative, fingers intertwining with a softness that felt both fragile and inevitable. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was enough, the sound of our breathing, the closeness of our hands, the shared admission that something unspoken had finally become real. For the first time, lying there in the stillness of the studio, I felt the balance she always talked about. Not in my body, but in the fragile, trembling connection between us. And I knew we had just stepped into something neither of us could take back. After that night in the studio, nothing between us was quite the same. We didn't rush into anything, we couldn't. Both of us carried the weight of what it might mean if we blurred the lines too quickly. But there was no denying the shift. The air between us carried a warmth now, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had passed in that moment of stillness when our hands found each other. The next class was almost comical in its attempt at normalcy. She stood at the front of the studio, calm and poised as ever, giving instructions as though nothing had changed. Yet, when she walked past my mat, her hand brushed lightly against my shoulder. Not as a correction. Not as guidance. Just as a touch, a quiet reassurance that I hadn't imagined what we shared. After class, she lingered. I lingered too. It became our pattern. No rushed declarations, no grand gestures, just small steps, steady and deliberate, like the way she taught me to hold a pose until my body found balance. We went for tea again, sometimes dinner. Conversations stretched late into the night, moving between laughter and silence, stories of her past and glimpses of my future. The age difference, which might have felt like a wall, slowly became something else, a bridge. Her stories were rich with experience, the kind of lessons I hadn't lived through yet. She spoke of mistakes and recoveries, heartbreak and resilience, all with a grace that only time could give. And in return, I offered her something she hadn't expected, a sense of possibility, of likeness, of being seen not as the composed instructor everyone admired, but as a woman with her own longings and fears. One evening, weeks later, the studio was nearly empty after class. She came over as I struggled through yet another pose, her hand sliding across my back to adjust me. Only this time, her touch lingered longer. My muscles weren't the only thing steadying beneath her palm, it was my heart too. I straightened slowly, looking at her, and she didn't move away. "You're getting better," she said softly, though her tone carried a meaning far deeper than posture. I smiled, and for once, I wasn't the nervous beginner fumbling through movements. I was simply a man standing close to a woman who mattered more to me than I'd realized possible. She smirked then, that same teasing expression from the very first day, though now softened by something warmer. "See? I told you I'd bend you into shapes you'd never tried before." We both laughed, but the words didn't sting with embarrassment anymore. They felt like a truth, a promise, because it wasn't just my body she had stretched. It was my heart, my understanding of what it meant to connect, to balance, to lean into someone else and let them lean back. And in that quiet moment, with her hand steady on my back and my smile steady on hers, I knew we had found it, our own kind of balance. Not perfect. Not without its challenges. But real, and ours.